Geocachomaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome to episode 237 of the GeoGearHeads, another dual Chris version of the show. And, well, Chris, the one that most of you know, the bad cop, my co-host, is coming to us live from Hawaii.
Hello there. Aloha, as they say in Hawaii. It's wonderful, guys, to be with you tonight. You know, it wouldn't be the same to skip an episode. I would miss you. So even though I am in paradise, I'm still here with you.
And you're experiencing that lovely weather from the porch, or from the balcony.
Oh, the balcony, yes. I may glance off over the camera and look out at the ocean, but, I'm really here with you. I really am.
You're just looking for those caches.
You better believe it. We've had, 80 to 88 degree temperatures. There's been a lot of rain, but even, when it's raining, it's still warm. It doesn't matter. You're, out in the water anyway, so what's a little more water falling on you? But we're not here to talk about Hawaii, even though there are some excellent caches here. We are privileged to have yet another Chris. Now, this is a Chris you may remember from other episodes. This is Chris. Some call him Rock Chalk from geocaching.com. So thanks for joining us tonight, Chris.
Always a pleasure to hang out with you guys.
And we're glad to have you back, even if it isn't from Hawaii. But I kind of got the impression from our pre-show conversation that if you were in Hawaii, you'd somehow just, forget the appointment.
That's probably a pretty good bet. I got to say, though, as Chris was describing his surroundings there, we're doing pretty well here in Washington. I'm looking at 70 degrees. It's sunny. It's not raining, Chris. So I don't know. You went an awful long ways to get an extra 10 degrees there.
Well, that extra 10 degrees does make a difference.
I suppose it does.
It's funny. My daughter's in the house sitting for me, and she texted me and said, "Dad, it's hot here. Can you turn up the air conditioning?" Well, I have a Wi-Fi thermostat that I can control, so it doesn't matter if I'm 2,500 miles away. I can still turn down the temperature in the house. So I happened to look at the temperatures in Washington today, and it looked great.
Yeah, it's been real nice. So the party's at your house this weekend. Is that what I understand?
It seems that way. Yes. I'm not going to tell you what I've seen on the cam, but.
Oh my. Well, Chris, you shouldn't have gone that far because you've got the mountains, you've got the ocean right by your house. So why'd you have to fly all that distance?
I don't know. I'm trying to tell my wife it's the same ocean. I mean, it's the Pacific Ocean. I'm just on another side of it, but it's the same water that's flowing right by our house. We didn't need to travel so far. Guys, we're here for our 25th wedding anniversary. So, we've got a couple of weeks here in Hawaii, and I tell you, within a couple of days, stress just melted away from me. And, I probably look far more relaxed than you're used to seeing.
Yeah, especially to the audio listeners.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Limax says that it's 91 degrees Fahrenheit in the Bay Area.
That's warm. Yeah, it's probably not dealing with the humidity, though.
No, well, I was telling you guys before the show, yesterday it was, I want to say 91 degrees Fahrenheit, and if I remember, we got up to like 89% humidity. Just nasty, nasty weather where you don't want to be outside. But before we get into anything else, geocaching.com announced a couple of new souvenirs, actually more than a couple. So, Mr. Rock Chalk, you want to give us a rundown on what's going on with those?
Oh yeah, so we announced the Mission GC project here a few days ago, and that'll be occurring. I think this last weekend of July, and then 2 weekends in August, where a week prior to each weekend, premium members will receive information that they will need to decode in order to figure out how to obtain each of the weekend's souvenirs. So similar to past years in that there is a promotion and there is souvenir opportunities there, but a little bit of a wrinkle, and we hope people enjoy what they'll be seeing later this month and next month. I would tell you more, but then I'd have to do what I'd have to do. So
Well,
just going along with the spy James Bond theme, what I'd have to do if I were to say more.
well, Chris, there was a problem with my email. I read it, and then I got distracted, came back, read it, and it was still there. And now it said it was supposed to self-destruct, but
Yeah, there must have been a bug with yours. I think everybody else's. My laptop exploded.
Oh, okay.
I actually had to buy a completely new unit, so I was a little bit upset about the whole promotion, but I'm glad it worked out for you.
Okay. Well, Chris, you were also telling us before the show, and listeners, we have a great before the show chat, just to catch up, make sure everybody is working right, and go over a few points. And it's during these little discussions that a lot of topics for the show come out. So one of them is, well, you've probably heard of Pokemon Go by now, right? It has taken the world by storm. And Chris, you're saying there's a lot of spillover into geocaching.com.
Yeah, we've seen a noticeable increase in geocaching.com signups over the past several days, and certainly there's been a whole lot of media coverage about the new app, and geocaching has been tied into that media coverage quite a bit, and which is pretty fascinating, especially if you've been around the game for a long time, because that there was a time when no one knew what geocaching was, and you had to explain it more often than not. And I think it says something about the maturity of our game that we are used as a reference point for a new game, So I think that's kind of exciting. But through some of the coverage, I think people who may not have still didn't know about geocaching are hearing about it, and Pokemon Go has some, people seem to really love it. It's getting people outside, which is from our standpoint, from Geocaching HQ standpoint, is a great thing. And if it also encourages some people to learn about our game and give it a shot, because as we all know too, while there are some similarities, there's quite a few differences, and I think there are some differences that make geocaching maybe a little bit more fun in some regards. So from our standpoint, it's all good stuff, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as time goes on with this phenomenon that's been happening over the past few days.
Well, so you guys are not looking at creating like a Geomon or something to take on Pokemon Go?
Pokecaching.
There you go. That sounds pretty good, actually.
Pokecache.
I'm going to trademark that. I'm going to trademark both of those, actually. No, there are no imminent plans for anything like that.
Not even just renaming the app, hoping for a couple extra downloads because it's similar.
You guys these are all good ideas, and I'm texting as we speak, to Brian and Jeremy. I've got some great ideas here. So yeah.
Lullaby for you in the live Q&A says, "Dear Pokemon Go trainers, thank you for making us look well-adjusted. Geocachers."
Now, at one of the hotel lobbies, there's several Pokestops. And, I've seen kids running back and forth with their phones, and I realized, oh, they're doing Pokemon Go. It used to be Ingress, but that one, there's been several people who have seen the Ingress players, seen the Pokemon Go players, and go, there's another game right here. So they've tried to do some recruiting as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and most of the Pokemon players that I've talked with haven't ever heard of Ingress. A few have heard of geocaching but never tried it. Mm-hmm. And like at the zoo, I was there Sunday, found a couple of the new caches, and half the zoo attendees seem to be playing Pokemon Go. And it's like, all of you guys running around playing Pokemon Go, and you're not even aware of this geocache over here.
Well, I'm
Right here,
thinking
sign the
they're
log.
they're capturing virtual animals when they could be looking at real animals.
Yes, but the real animals aren't as much fun.
Oh,
They
yeah,
just kind of lay around and sleep, especially in this hot weather.
that's true. That's true.
You go to
I
the zoo quite a bit, don't you, Daryl?
I do, because it's
I
fairly
feel
close.
like you're periscoping from the zoo like every other day. It's
Well, this was actually the first weekend I think I was at the zoo in over a month.
really,
Yeah.
gosh, it feels like it's more often.
Slacker.
But the zoo is a nice spot for me to play with the periscope tech.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I'll bring out the GoPro, play with that a little bit. It's a nice, predictable environment, a lot more so than when I'm out trying to find a cache.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
one of
you're
those
not trying
things.
to.
I always feel like I should go more often, to the zoo. I actually now my new bike commute, I actually go directly past the Seattle Zoo every day, so I ought to get some sort of a pass,
Yeah,
just
definitely.
check it out once a week or something.
Well, I work a little over a mile from the zoo, and actually tried doing like the lunch at the zoo thing. But just by the time I get through the gate and sit down, then it's time to go back to work.
Mm,
So it doesn't really work.
yeah.
You're just gonna have to sit with the ticket takers and have lunch there.
Yeah, well, I thought about just sitting in the parking lot or something, but that doesn't seem like much fun.
Hmm.
Especially because there's not many of the portals available from the parking lot.
Oh, wow. That's why you're going there.
Of course. Well, let's move on to our actual topic for the evening. And of course, the challenge caches have been the big news in the last several months. We haven't really talked about it too much on this show. It's been covered, though, pretty well. Before we get into the individual challenge types and what's allowed and what's not, because that still seems to be an area of confusion for a lot of our audience and myself and a lot of people that I talk with. Uh, can you give us kind of a general overview of how this has gone with the players from your perspectives? Because you were on the team that made these decisions.
It kind of depends on what day you ask me.
I was
um,
afraid of that.
I would say that overall, I think it's gone better than we could have hoped for. I think any time that you change something, there's a natural uh, uh, reaction to it that isn't always great. But I think that most people understood that something had to be done, and I think that I think we tried really hard to be transparent about the reasons things were done, and try to be as open about it as we could be, and that seemed to help a lot too. As you said, there are still things that are can be confusing, and it's going to take some time for the dust to settle, and for uh, not just players but reviewers and HQ to make sure that we're on the right track with this. But overall, I really do think the majority of the community seems to be okay with it for the most part, and there are some folks that aren't as okay with it, um, but I do think that if we were to take a poll, and we haven't, but if we were to, the sentiment seems to be generally good, and nothing was going to satisfy 100% of the people, but I think what we have so far has generally been pretty positive.
Very good. And one of the things that I took away from reading everything when it first came out is this is not expected to be the final. This is just kind of like the stopgap to test test the water, see how things are going, make sure things are working, and then you'll come out with new guidelines probably like next May.
Well, I think what we were trying to say was that we know that like, for instance, a lot of people want a new icon. That was by far the number one thing that we saw through our user insight thing that we did, our forum, and then the survey that we did, it was very high that people wanted an icon. A lot of reviewers want a new icon and weren't that we don't have one now, but we didn't want to have these new guidelines and this new framework and then put a bunch of engineering time into a new icon and then have the stuff that we came up with not solve the issues that were happening, and then 6 months or a year later have to say, oh, that new icon, let's pull that back, this whole thing's over. So we wanted to start with this, and then if it works out well, then we can look really hard at something like a new icon, which would solve some more of the problems. Well, maybe not problems, but some more of the stumbling blocks that there tend to be with challenge caches. So that was kind of the take on it. There have been a few tweaks here and there since the moratorium ended, and part of the reason for that is that we, of course, when you have a new thing come out, people are going to find ways to poke holes in whatever it is that you came up with, no matter how much planning you do for it. So we've had a couple of things that we've tweaked since the moratorium ended, with the idea behind that being that let's not let stuff boil and have a huge problem again. Let's try to address these little deals as they come along. But to your point about what might happen next May or next June or whatever, I think that is largely centered around, would there be an icon, would there be, would it have its own cache type and all that stuff. And we'll probably wait until first of the year before we start really being able to make any kind of decisions or even making any headway towards decisions on that kind of stuff, because we need to give this time to play out and let players get used to it and let reviewers get used to it, and then once the dust settles, we can start looking ahead to whatever next steps there might be.
In the live Q&A, Limax is saying his number one annoyance with challenge caches are the challenge cache power trails. He was actually sending me a screenshot last week or the week before. There's an entire bike trail or road or something that's somewhere around 20 plus challenge geocaches on it, and that does seem a little bit weird, but
well, it's kind of like with any power trail, though. It's difficult to say when something that's extremely subjective, trying to figure out what's too much, and that's really not something that a reviewer can has anything to really even point to and say that's a guideline infraction. I think from my standpoint, when I look at stuff like that, I would tend to say, because I a lot of times I kind of look at challenge caches, and then again, this is me personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of HQ, but I tend to look at them somewhat like I do like puzzle caches or mystery caches, in that not everybody is going to be able to find them. So it kind of kills me a little bit when I see a really hard, like a D5 mystery in a incredible view of of whatever, and knowing that only a fraction of the community is going to be able to find that. I kind of feel the same way if I hear about a challenge power trail, and that if it's going along this beautiful bike path where kids are biking with their parents and nobody yeah, you can find the container, but you can't say that you found it unless you qualify. I personally don't know if that's the best place for something like that, but I kind of feel like if somebody decided that they wanted to put something like that out on some country road where there was never going to be another cache, then maybe that's not the worst use of that space. But again, it's all subjective, and so that's why reviewers would have a really difficult time, even if they wanted to do something about that, in doing anything about it.
Well, and a lot of people I know are really into the challenge caches and would love a trail like that. I don't happen to like that idea so much because, again, like you were saying, it restricts a lot of people from finding it that would otherwise go to that area. But like Scott Burks and Shorty Knits, who helped us put together this list tonight of these caches, these challenge cache types, they'd probably really enjoy something like that. Limax is giving us clarification. This was along a frontage road next to a freeway.
Mm.
See, that's not a bad spot for.
No, I was just going to say, if it's that, there's no real good scenery. I'd have a hard time arguing against it, other than it's a whole bunch of caches I don't want to find necessarily. In which case, I'll put them on my ignore list.
There you go, and it messes up your caches along a route.
Yeah, that it does. Which I use quite frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get to this list of the types of challenge caches, and some of these, when you put your responses in here, kind of surprised me as to what they were, and there was even like one or two that I thought were no's that are actually yeses. So the first couple, though, these were no question at all, and the first one is the DNF challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, DNF, because that's kind of falls under positive challenge criteria, and that's been around. That's not a new thing. That's actually been around for a while. That was pre-moratorium DNF stuff, not having challenges that are around negative stuff. So yeah, that's the reason for that one. That one's not new.
Well, I think that was even given as the example in the guidelines is, e.g., no DNF caches.
Yeah, right.
And then the next one is FTFs.
Yeah, and FTF is again, it's there and it's spelled out a little bit in the guidelines as being competition rather than achievement. But the other thing with FTF is it's not something that is verifiable on the website. We don't have a way of of determining whether you were FTF or not. That's a side game that people play, but it's not possible to quantify it on the website. So there's a couple of reasons for that one, but again, there's a couple of grandfathered ones out there, but that's been in the guidelines for a while too. That's not new.
And then percentage of fines. This one I think is actually new, but this is where it's like at least something like 15% of non-traditionals.
Yeah, that I'm trying to think. So is that saying that at least 15% of your fines have to be non-traditional? Is that
correct?
Okay, so if you found 100 caches, at least 15 of them have to be something other than traditional. Is that
correct? No more than 85 would be traditionals. So
yeah, that's getting into, which again is not a new one. That's getting into basically punishing you for finding. You would basically have to skip over finding caches in order to be able to qualify for that. Potentially, you wouldn't necessarily have to, but there's a good chance that in order to keep your percentage at 15 or higher, you might have to skip over this series of 20 traditional that your friends want to go find. You'd have to say, oh, no, I can't do that because I'm working on this challenge. So again, that's pre-moratorium, but it's not a bad idea to explain the reasoning behind it.
Yeah. Well, and I was actually thinking that was new. Limax says he's actually found one of those percentage caches like that in his area, which is probably when that was grandfathered.
Yeah, I have too, and that's there's some of those things that are grandfathered out there, which can be tough sometimes when there's grandfathered stuff out there, because it does, somebody sees it and they say, oh, I want to put one out like that, and then they find out that they can't, and they wonder why, and then they're told that it's grandfathered. But yeah, there's some of them out there, and I've certainly found them too.
Nice. Now, what about county challenges?
So yeah, counties are a permitted criteria, and that's something that, whoops, sorry about that, I accidentally hit a switch. They are permitted criteria, which is it's one that we made an exception for. counties, as you know, are not verifiable on the website. We don't have county data on cache pages. But we as we were looking at the subject of defining geographic areas as part of challenge caches, the only really verifiable stuff through the website is country, state, or province. You know, those are the geographic areas that are easily verifiable. And we didn't like the idea of just saying only those would work. And we know people like county type stuff. It's kind of a traditional kind of challenge criteria, and so we decided to make an exception for that because county boundaries are easily it's something that you can figure out pretty easily. It's public information, it's out there, and it allows people to have a little bit more creativity with what they're trying to do with their challenge.
Nice. So then I assume zip codes are the same way.
Zip code, you know what? I would have to look into zip code. That's something that I haven't thought about, but I think that would be defining, because yeah, we don't have zip code information on the website, so I don't think the zip code would work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then the one that everybody loves, and I think Daryl more than others because he owns one of these, a DeLorme challenge.
Yeah, DeLormes are a no-go at this point. I'm not sure how much of a difference it'll make in the immediate, just because I think every place that wants one has one, as far as here in the U.S. But yeah, since that would be defining geography something in a way in country, province, state, or county, map book stuff like DeLorme wouldn't work under the current guidelines.
Well, and I don't think DeLorme's even publishing atlases anymore, so it might not seem...
Well, yeah, now that they've been purchased, I think their own future is a little bit up in the air, but...
See, that leaves them locked in, though. They can't change.
Well, and I was going to say, one of the problems that I have with the DeLorme challenges is you have to set the edition, because it does change. So mine is set for, I want to say, 12th and 13th edition. If you got the 14th edition, it's totally different. So there's some of the local cachers who aren't very happy because that's not the current book.
Yeah.
And Limax says that you used to be able to search by zip code on geocaching.com. And I think what he's talking about is you can put the zip code in, but I didn't think it limited to a zip code. That just centered the search in that zip code.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, that is right with the old search, which I suppose you can still get to. That's a good point. You're able to search by that, but again, it's defining an area by some way other than state. I'm going to sound like a broken record. Country, state, province, county. So yeah, for now, those are the only criteria that are okay with defining the area from where caches can come from to satisfy a challenge.
And then let's move on to the next one on the list, which is the number of states. The big one is, X number of states overall, so, like 25 states.
And that's totally okay. Yeah,
and that would also translate to provinces.
Yeah, as long as it's cumulative, as long as you can do it over any period of time, that's totally an acceptable criteria.
Which brings us to the next one, that's the states within a period of time, say, X number of states in a month.
Yeah, which falls under one of the new things, the time-limited guideline. So, yeah, restricting the amount of time that somebody has to find 3 states or 30 states or whatever wouldn't be permitted.
Or do, 2 countries in a day.
Yeah, same thing. Anything that's in a day, in a month, in a year, yeah, that's any of that time-limited stuff has been restricted since the moratorium ended.
And then the battleship challenge is the next one, and this is one I hadn't heard of until Jesse filled me in on it, and that's to clear an area like Bussy Woods or like Niles, something like that. So the whole point is, again, defining this area which might be like a park that needs to be cleared of all the caches.
I was going to say, so would this be the same as a blackout challenge? The idea is you get all the caches within an area?
Right. And
Okay.
now that you mentioned it, I've heard the blackout challenge. But
That's
when
what
I've
we call
heard,
them around Washington.
when I've heard the battleship, it's always been not a challenge but a puzzle, and you have to go find caches in a certain grid, and that gives you the coordinates to the final.
Yeah, maybe it's just a difference in terminology. I've always heard blackout as well, but if the issue is clearing a specific area, unless it's find a certain number of caches in Washington or Michigan or whatever it is, doing that would be okay. But saying find a certain number of caches in Daryl's neighborhood, that would not work.
Not within 3 blocks of Daryl's house?
I would like to try to black that area out. So I'm gonna. How many caches are there, Daryl?
5.
Okay, so I could make it an in a day challenge too.
Yes.
Well,
Limex,
I think you could.
It would take a day just to get here. But Limex says he spotted a challenge cache in Sacramento that was a challenge to find caches close to 50 state capitals, and he thinks that's the building itself.
Yeah, I would assume maybe that's a grandfathered one. I don't.
Sure.
I'd be surprised if that's been published since the moratorium. But yeah, I've seen ones like that too. I think I have one that I've signed before that was, except it was only like 30, maybe 30. You had to go to like 30 state capitals, which I don't think I've done yet. But yeah, basically you had to find it in the city of the capital of each state. So yeah, there's some out there that are going to be grandfathered.
And you were breaking up a little bit there, but we got the gist of it. He also said, in regards to the blackout or battleship style, that they have a clear the area cache that ended up having more caches published in the park, which is, I'm sure, one of the reasons why this would be a problem as well.
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those things where it becomes this moving target, and there are a lot of issues with those kind of things. One of them is that. One of them is that, in theory, if a person, let's say that there's a big park and one person owns 20 caches in this 80-acre park or something, and they create a challenge to find all the caches in this park, well, basically what they've done is make a challenge to find all of their own caches. So there are some situations where there could be some potential for some misuse there. And then it kind of goes back to the main reason for most of the changes that happened because of after the moratorium, which most of the changes were built around trying to make the review process as non-subjective as possible. And so this kind of thing is kind of a prime example of a situation where a reviewer really has to look at it, and if there is a, Daryl's neighborhood or Chris's neighborhood or whatever, somebody creates a certain space and then creates a challenge around that space, it adds in a lot of variables a lot more variables for the reviewer to have to consider, as opposed to if it's just based strictly on those areas that we talked about before, country, state, province, county. Those tend to have a lot fewer issues for the reviewers to have to deal with.
Meanwhile, Limex says that the Jasmer is a moving target. Excuse me, Jasmer is only moving from mud puddle to mud puddle.
Interesting. Why is that?
I think what he's talking about is it's a moving target for the Jasmers because that's the date placed. So every month or month place. So every month it adds another month to the calendar or to the challenge.
But I don't get the mud puddle reference.
Neither do I, but I'm assuming it's because Jasper. Ah, okay. That would be probably Jasper National Park. Hence the mud.
Could be, or it could be Land Monkey's dog.
Oh. All right, let's move on to some of the more common. Yeah, I'm sure. But let's move on to a couple of the really common, like original challenges, actually, and the first one being the Fizzy Challenge.
Yeah, the Fizzy's, yeah, it's totally fine. That's one of those classics that I think most, a lot of us are working on. So, yeah, Fizzy Challenge is a great achievement, and no problem with that at all.
And then the difficulty terrain challenges, where you have to find X number of 5 5s or something.
Yeah, most of those are okay because they're easily verifiable, and for the most part, those are going to work. We've seen a few come in that we've either disallowed when they came to appeals, or the reviewer was able to convince the player that maybe it wasn't a great idea, and those were ones where people took difficulty terrain and just tried to come up with very random combinations that you had to get in order to satisfy the challenge. So it might be you had to find, for instance, finding difficulty level at 5 terrain or 4 terrain or whatever, that's a very easy to understand challenge. But some of these would be, you have to find a 1-1, a 2-3, a 3-5. It was a really random collection of numbers that kind of, from our standpoint, failed the easy to understand and explain guideline. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what I would call normal DT challenges are totally fine.
Would you have any problem with, say, half-star challenges? You have to find, all the combinations of the half stars. I'm just throwing something out.
I'd have to. It's difficult for me to think through without actually seeing it on paper. Okay. But if you're if you're saying
1.5, 2.5, 2.5, 3.5, 3.5.
Yeah, that could potentially work. Again, a lot of times it's one of those things you kind of know it when you see it, and mm-hmm. So when we look at it, or a reviewer looks at it, it tends to be a lot easier to have a coherent thought on it if you can actually see it in writing.
Sure.
All right, here's one that's going to probably throw you for a little bit of a loop. Land Monkey has what I think is actually a pretty good idea for cache, not necessarily a challenge. But how about a challenge where an experienced cacher, someone who has maybe 1,000 finds or more, must claim the cache with a new cacher less than 100 finds? You can have a challenge checker that verifies that you are over 1,000 finds, a GeoMentors cache.
I was going to say it would be a mentor cache.
Right. Which is why I like that, but I can't imagine that would actually pass.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't, because it requires you to find somebody else. It isn't something that you can just achieve by going out and doing it on your own. But the idea behind it, I think the idea behind it is a good one. Just the notion of people mentoring other cachers, that's awesome. Not that we want to discourage that. It's one of those things where I'm not sure a challenge cache is necessarily the way that we want to try to encourage that to happen. There's other ways that we can encourage it, because that kind of falls into, is it an achievement? Are you strive? There's one thing that as I talk about challenges at work, I have this, it's just kind of a personal thing that I think about. It's called the "What are you working on?" Litmus test. And what that is that if you're thinking of, if you're thinking of a challenge cache, if you've got an idea in mind for a challenge cache, think to yourself, what would this sound like if I was explaining to somebody else? If they said, "Hey, what are you working on? What are you trying to what are you trying to do with your geocaching right now?" You say, "Oh, well, I'm trying to complete the Fizzy, or oh, I'm trying to finish the Jasmer, or I need to find 55 terrain caches, so I'm working on that." But some of the crazy stuff that we get, it's like, oh, I'm trying to spell the word xylophone with only the first letter of multi-caches. I mean, that's never something that you would say to somebody else and have them say, "Oh, that sounds really cool. I want to work on that too." So what I try to encourage people is, when you have an idea, think to yourself, could you envision somebody telling another person, "I'm working on insert your challenge cache idea," and have that sound like a reasonable thing. And so, as much as I like the notion, for instance, of a cache that encouraged people to mentor other cachers, you would think, okay, I'm working on, well, I need to find a newbie that has fewer than 100 finds so that I can qualify for this challenge cache. I don't know that really sounds so much like an achievement.
Well, and Limax came up with another good point, which is it's fairly easy to game the system, because he saw 4 caches in Boise that were published by someone who had no finds, all easy puzzles, and he hasn't made the finds. So, someone who has a sock puppet account could go out and find the cache alone and claim that they found it with a newbie.
Sure. Yeah, that's possible. And I see Land Monkey's comment, which is a good one, I think, when he said, "How about we have a souvenir for geo mentors?" And that's something that we have thought about, finding a way to reward people, not just for mentoring in the way that that brief idea that he had for a challenge cache, but for instance, people that host geocaching 101 events and things like that, to try to find a way to reward that in a way that encourages more people to want to get out there and do it. And I don't think we've landed on what the right quote-unquote reward is, but I think he's right on the money that it's a great idea to try to find a way to encourage those sorts of things.
Chris, I think after this episode goes out, people are going to think of challenge caches, and they're going to say to themselves, "What would Rock Chalk say?"
We need a bumper sticker, don't we?
There you go.
Have challenge cache, and then W. I'm trying to think what it would be. WWRC.
RCS.
WWRCD.
I'm seeing geocaching T-shirts, so they're trackable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd buy one, because I'm just that self-absorbed that I'd want a T-shirt about my own deal. Yeah. If somebody wants to run with that idea, go for it.
It'd have a tracking number that starts with like RC or something.
Sure, yeah.
We are already over the 40-minute mark, and we got a whole bunch more. So let's try to consolidate these a little bit. And the next one on the list is the Iconic Day Challenge, which is like the busy days. I know that one's not permitted at all, and most of those are going to be excluded for the time limits, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So like souvenirs challenges, you have to have a certain number of souvenirs in a day. That would be out.
In a day would be, but cumulative would be okay for souvenirs. Souvenirs would be an acceptable criteria if it was a cumulative challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the 12 Days of Christmas challenges, that actually runs into a different problem, if I'm correct, where it's 1 cache on the first day, 2 caches on the second day, 3 on the third, exactly those number of caches.
Yeah, that's something that not only is time limited, but that's something that a lot of those were probably pushed back on in recent years anyway, just because it punishes people for finding, for instance, more than one cache in a day. So there are definitely going to be some grandfathered ones out there, and I've certainly found them. But we don't want to tell somebody you can't find more than one cache or two caches or whatever the case may be. That kind of just goes against what we want people to find geocaches.
And then Land Monkey, going back to the T-shirt, says that you'd definitely buy one of those, but he wants one that says, "What would Ben say?"
Oh God, that's.
Well, you
So
are
T-shirt idea is
T-shirt
done. You don't want any T-shirts now.
I was going to see Land. I think I'm supposed to see Land Monkey this weekend, but I know I'm gonna have to avoid him because I'm a little bit upset with him. So
you get your time on the show. And he's bringing it back to Ben, who's your PR monitor.
He's my nemesis. I thought we could have some time just without talking about him, but apparently that's not possible. So.
All right.
Nice.
So favorite point caches.
There you go.
Yeah, generally favorite point caches are going to be okay. Again, I can't say in a blanket way. I'm sure people come up with ways where they wouldn't work, but generally as a criteria, they are going to be okay.
Yeah, and the example that Jesse had found was one with 20 caches that add up to at least 500 favorite points.
Yeah, stuff like that we've seen being okay here in the early days. I've seen a couple though too, and here's where it starts to get a little bit subjective. Somebody says 20 caches that add up to 5,000 favorite points, and now you get into, okay, is that a reasonable number? So
are there 20 caches that do that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There certainly would be, but are they? Is it reasonable to expect that that's something that people would be able to do? So it gets into how many caches in your area qualify and all that kind of stuff. But if it's the ones that I can say are simple, would be something like find 10 of the top 20 favorited highest favorite point caches in your state. Well, that's totally reasonable, and that'd be a good challenge.
And then how about some of the date-based ones like the streak challenges?
Yeah, streaks are okay. We have the guideline where it can't go over 365 days. So up to 365 is going to be okay. But if you tried to do a 400-day or a 500-day, then that would get pushed back.
And then the 365, 366 challenges?
Yeah, so anything over 360. I mean,
those are the ones where you have to have found a cache, or in some cases, place the cache on every calendar day. So the
okay, I see. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, a cumulative challenge like that would generally be okay.
And then the year challenges, so you have to have found a cache in a certain number of caches in like 2012. Usually, I think that's by placed date.
Okay, so you're saying find a certain number of caches that were placed in 2012.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, top of my head, that would, for most places, that would be okay. Yeah, again, that's one I'd have to see in writing. I'm not sure that I'm computing it in my brain, but it sounds like it would be okay.
And then the lonely cache challenges.
Well, the trouble with those is it doesn't appear that a checker can be written for lonely cache challenges, so we haven't dove into those a whole lot.
Oh, I wonder if we're actually losing Chris altogether. Yeah, Rockchuck, we actually lost you altogether there for a moment.
But it sounds like at this point a checker can't be created for them, but that's not ruling out anything in the future.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I think Rockchalk's internet access has kind of gone a little bit sideways out there. Mm-hmm. I think Ben is taking his revenge.
Oh, there, he was dropped.
He was. So most likely we're not going to get to ask him about the alphanumeric challenges, which those we know are not permitted, including like height
no spelling
challenges.
xylophone.
Right. The reviewer challenges aren't permitted. Name-based challenges, nope, not going to allow it. Not going to allow it at all. And I think Ratchak might be
Ben
back.
let him back on.
Am I back again?
Yeah. So Ben got his revenge on you,
Cut
huh?
your cable.
Yeah, apparently I need to check my outside of my house. He probably is out there with his scissors. I wouldn't put it past him. You guys laugh. I wouldn't be surprised at all if I see him walk past the window here.
See, I figured he'd just come up with a software solution.
No, you're probably right. He does know the developers a lot better than I do, so he probably would find a way to hack into my internet and start playing Scooby-Doo cartoons or something on my screen. So,
all right. How about the attribute challenges?
yeah, attributes are an acceptable criteria. Except for, and the one thing I will say, there is one, the partnership attribute is one that we don't permit to be part of challenges because it's not an attribute that players can put on their caches. It's one that can only be given by HQ, and it's used for business partnerships that HQ has with various entities. So it comes and goes as a partnership runs its course. So the problem with that, and I had this happen before I came to work at HQ, I had an attribute challenge I was working on, and I found a cache that had the partnership attribute, and then 2 months later when I was ready to sign the challenge, I looked and the attribute's gone, and I thought there was something wrong with, I thought I was gone crazy. I thought, wait, I know I found that cache, and then later when I came to work here, I found out that that attribute isn't necessarily permanent. It can come and go. So we didn't want to set people up for for disappointment, but then B, we've had situations where people have written in and been very upset because they were trying to qualify for a challenge that required them to find the partnership attribute, and the attribute was gone, had been taken off of some cache, and they wanted it to be put back on. And we're like, that's not what the attribute system was created for. It wasn't created so that it could be there for challenge caches. It was created for other reasons, and so that's one of the reasons that we while attributes in general are an accepted criteria, the partnership attribute is excluded from that.
And then what about the miles apart challenges? Like you have to found 2 caches at least 100 miles apart.
Gosh, I'd have to. I'm not sure that one's come up yet. I think when I saw that on the list, I was thinking about miles, cumulative miles of your fines. Top of my head, it seems like it works, but that's one I'd want to look into a little bit more.
All right. Let's move on a little bit more here to the 360-degree challenges. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is where you have to log caches within a degree interval around the challenge cache's coordinates. And these were kind of hot about a year or two ago when, before the moratorium, when we had the checkers from Project GC and GSEC that got pretty hot.
Yeah, and that's again going back to that thing we've talked about a few times now, in that you're defining geographic area in a way other than the acceptable standards, so that one wouldn't work.
And then the BFE challenge, which is X number of caches with no other caches within a certain distance.
I'd be interested to see if a checker could be worked for that one. That seems like it'd be similar to lonely caches, wouldn't it?
Well, and the thing that I saw as a problem with this one is you could you could complete a cache that didn't have anything around it at the time, but by the time you logged it, they might have published new caches.
Yeah, that would be a tough go, I think, on that one.
And then cooperation, where you need to have caches with a certain number of people based on the log text.
Yeah, and that's one that one of the guidelines being that it can't be based on log text. So yeah, that one would not work.
And then the challenges, where we'll just go down to just any kind of caches based on challenge caches.
Yeah, unless and until challenges have their own cache type, that wouldn't work because the only way that you can identify them is by their title, and cache titles aren't an accepted criteria. So if there comes a time when they have their own icon, then that would be possible, but for now it wouldn't be.
All right, so I'm going to cut the list off there because, well, we're running over 50 minutes now, and we don't want to keep you guys too long.
It goes fast, doesn't it?
It does, and we have a great question by Land Monkey. Bad Cop, do you want to read that one?
I can if you give me just a second here.
Oh, we caught you off guard.
Yeah, well, I've got a small screen, so I have to stretch the window over to read it all. It says, he says, sorry if this has been asked, but to confirm, all existing challenge caches that are being grandfathered, are there any that really go against? Are any that really go against the new criteria being asked to be archived or rules modified?
The first answer is yes.
All existing.
Yeah, they've been grandfathered. However, there is a line there in the new in the guidelines now that does say that if a cache becomes problematic, if it's brought to our attention that it's just really an egregious example of something that really goes against current guidelines and could cause problems in some way, then we have to look at it. And that has happened a couple of times here and there. Mostly it's happened when there's a challenge that one of the older ones that, like, for instance, requires you to contact the cache owner in order to get the actual coordinates, or stuff like that, that just that kind of requirement wasn't grandfathered. That isn't something that you're allowed to do. So if we find out that that's part of it, we'll give the person the opportunity to remove that. But honestly, surprisingly to me, more often than not, people say, no, I don't want to take that off. That to me is an integral part of the challenge, is that they can't find it unless I give them the coordinates. And we say, okay, well, we have to archive it then. So it doesn't happen often. It's not a common thing, but it has happened.
Interesting. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some of the guidelines, some of the things that you would say about challenge caches. I'm trying to push the T-shirt idea a little more. What would Rock Chalk say?
It's my pleasure, and yeah, if we can get a T-shirt out of this deal, then it's all been worth it.
Well, I'm going to Midwest GeoBash next weekend. I know there's at least one T-shirt vendor there that I could talk to about it.
Oh, cool. Well, I hope you'll have I think I'll have to look and see. I think somebody from HQ was going to be going to that, so you can track them down and talk about the idea.
There we go. We'll have to get them all together and force them to come up with the T-shirt and get it marketed.
There you go.
I'll talk to the business office this week. We'll have it done.
And thanks again. Now we do have a whole bunch of great shows coming up. Next week is going to be an exciting one. We're going to have, for the GPSR, Land Monkey, who's been harassing us in the live Q&A, and for the smartphone, Scott Burks, and they're going to battle it out to figure out which one is actually the best choice for geocachers. Then the following week, on the 28th, is going to be our next randomized show. And again, that Chris, we're looking at a full show doc with all of the stuff, especially now with Pokemon Go coming out.
Oh boy.
We can't help but to talk about some of the stuff on there, like the pizza places offering free pizzas to people who are level 15 or higher.
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's
I
all
got to get
kinds of stuff
playing
like
more.
that happen. Yeah, and there's another pizza place that bought a bunch of lures, put the lures on the portal near their shop, and pizza sales went up 30%.
Wow. That's amazing.
Quantifiable numbers. It's amazing. Anyways, for our first show of August, we're going to be talking about smartphone caching again, and that's going to be talking about what you can do if you are a smartphone cacher to make that battery last longer and get the best out of your device. Then, on the 11th, we're talking tech or the event support, things like loading those smartphone caches if you have new caches for the event and all that kind of stuff. So we got a lot of great shows that people are really going to want to check out over the next 4 weeks.
But until that time, check the Cacheamaniacs website at cacheamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing geogearheads at cacheamaniacs.com or through the many channels of social media. Your support helps keep the Cacheamaniac shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cacheamaniac shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show's copyright 2016 by Daryl Wattenberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with the Cacheamaniacs.